What's the best way you've seen someone rebel against school rules? Story 1. Back in the 1980s, there was this one kid in my school who was hardcore into the pink scene. Had a bright blue, 6-inch high, razor-thin stand-up straight mohawk. The principal gave him detention for being a distraction, etc. And his parting words that day were, "And tomorrow, no more blue mohawk." The next day the kid came in with the same mohawk, only bright pink. Story 2. No hats in school. In high school junior year, there was this one kid in my grade that was allowed due to him having alopecia universalis, which is basically having rapid baldness. A new teacher wasn't aware that he was allowed to and asked him to take it off. The kid explained why he was able to, but the sub didn't believe him, forced him to take it off, and was being very cruel to him for wearing the hat / his lack of hair. The next day everyone wore hats to school as a sort of rebellion against the teacher. She got really mad and started yelling at the students and said some now nasty things. She got fired, deservedly, being cruel to a kid who wasn't pulling your leg and is actually bald. A bad case of a teacher is always right. Complex. Story 3. Senior year, my school banned jackets. A friend was cold, wore his jacket to lunch, and the vice principal told him to take it off. Friend pulled out the student handbook and asked where it said he couldn't wear it. Vice principal flips for a while and ends up showing him the "or anything the administration seems disruptive" clause. Friend rolls his eyes but takes off his coat. The next day a friend comes in with the same tweed sport coat the vice principal wore every day. Story 4. After the Columbine shooting, our school banned black trench coats. For the most part, nobody cared except the mysteriously gothic trench coat kid. He had worn a trademark black trench coat every single day because it made him different. And then all of a sudden the school tells him he can't do that anymore. So the kid went out of his way to find or make different colored trench coats and wore those in instead. My favorite one was covered in duct tape. Reminds me of a guy who came to school every day, dressed in old-fashioned formal clothing. Suits, top hats, cravats, fake fur coats. I bumped into him the other day and he still dresses like that. I'm glad he does. Story 5. I was at a private school that had rules about the length of boys' hair. One guy in particular always ignored the rule, and the administration would tell him to get a haircut every so often, but he never did. Eventually, when his hair got about down to his shoulders, the principal pulled him aside and told him his hair was twice the allowed length, and by next week it needed to be shortened by half. Monday rolls around and he comes in with half his head shaved and the other side as long as ever. We were impressed by the literal interpretation of the principal's request, but it still ended up with him getting a suspension for a week, and he had to shave the other side before he could come back. Story 6. My school made a rule where we had to wear our school IDs. They went overboard, quickly handing out detention to anyone who didn't wear one. One kid had his ID blown up and put on a shirt on the back. It said, "Yes, I'm wearing my ID." He got detention for not wearing it with the shirt. Story 7. Last day of senior year, we started a food fight at lunch. And by food fight, I mean we drew angry faces on an orange and an apple, then faced them toward each other, made a big circle around them, and we all reacted like we were watching a fight. All the security guards ran to break up the fight, only to make their way to the middle of the circle to find 2 pieces of fruit sitting on the ground. Story 8. A buddy of mine was caught messing with his phone during class. Back then, the school rules were that if you were caught, your phone was confiscated for an entire day, and you couldn't get it back until the next day. This was before smartphones, and the rules have changed since the 10 years that I graduate there. So buddy hands in his phone, but doesn't seem too worried about it. He waits a couple of classes until lunch break and asks me to come with him. He's gonna get his phone back. We went to the staff room where the confiscated phones were held and asked teacher if you could copy down a number into my phone so he could call his dad later that day. Teacher agrees and gives him the phone. I hand him mine and we wait for him to copy the number. When he's done, he gives me mine back and sticks his own phone in his pocket. He was known as a bit of a joker, so when he jokingly said, "Well, thanks a lot. See ya," the teacher immediately laughs, tells him to stop messing about and to give the phone back, laughing and joking about being caught as he does, but not really. See, he had a second phone, the exact same model, except this one was broken. Wouldn't charge anymore. he said. So when he stuck his good phone in his pocket, it was right next to the broken one. When the teacher made him give back the phone, he just gave back the broken one. It was the best switcheroo I have ever seen in my time at that school. He was so fluent, so nonchalant about the whole thing. It was amazing to see. Yeah, that rule is a terrible rule. Thank goodness I've never been in a school with that rule. My phone's my only alarm, and without it, I'd sleep an extra 5 hours. Story 9. Halloween costumes were banned at my high school because of some idiots, like 10 years before that, dressed up and used it as an excuse to hide their face while they vandalized the school. My senior year, more than half of the class decided that we would still dress up and march into the school together in the morning. We all knew we would be punished right away, but it didn't matter. I stayed up all night making a suit of armor out of metallic duct tape and cardboard, along with a broomstick horse to ride the next day. We all gathered in the parking lot and waited for everyone to show up. People went all out, and there were a lot of amazing costumes. And after about 20 minutes of waiting, we started our marching. The deans had learned of our plan and were waiting for us right as we entered. They started pulling people aside in groups and taking students' IDs to hand out detentions. In my group, there was one guy dressed up as an ATM, and when the dean asked for his ID, he started making ATM noises and then slipped the ID out through the slot where you would put your debit card in. It was one of the funniest things, and I was so jealous that my costume was not as clever as his, even though having so many of us participate was pretty awesome. His costume just made the whole event for me. Story 10. Fran was told in high school by his guidance counselor not to waste his time applying to his dream school because he wouldn't get in. He got pissed off and went to the principal, who told him it was the counselor's job to give her her best opinion, so he trusts whatever she says. He applied anyway and got in. He took the acceptance letter, made a copy, and taped them to both the principal and counselor's door with "Thanks for nothing" written on both. He didn't even go to that school. He couldn't afford it, but it was the principle of the matter. Story 11. We had an awful Spanish teacher in middle school who collectively punished the class by making us write the same sentence 100 times over in detention. On one of these occasions, my friend and I asked her if we could type our detention in the computer lab. This was when computers in schools were a new thing, so we could improve our typing speed, and she said yes. Anyway, we didn't do much typing, but we did learn how to write a basic program that printed the same line 100 times over. We didn't copy-paste because our computer teacher took this as a teachable moment and/or opportunity for malicious compliance and showed us how to do rudimentary programming instead of cheating our way through it. Also, copy-paste might not have been invented yet. Those of you posting solutions need to keep in mind that the program also needs to print the line number before each repeat. Otherwise, how else will Mrs. Cortez know you typed exactly 100 lines? Story 12. When I was in high school, there was a rule implemented that if you showed up late to school, you had to go to the front office to get a detention slip. You would then have to give it to the teacher for that period, who would then mark it down, and you were required to go to lunch detention for that day. I figured out by the third slip that literally no one cared, teachers, security, or students. So when I was subsequently late for the rest of the year, I would take out an old slip that I had from a previous detention, walk through school, give it to my teacher to mark down, then take it back to give to the lunch to attention supervisor. But I never went to detention because the front office didn't have a record of me being late. I was late no less than 50 times my senior year, having only been reprimanded the initial 3 times. I even told my parents about it after I had graduated, and even they agreed it was dumb and funny. My school had a similarly easy to abuse tardy system. 3 tardies less than 10 minutes late equaled an unexcused absence, and you were allowed 13 of those for every class. So that meant you could miss the first 10 minutes of every class 38 times with no consequences except teacher annoyance. It also reset at the semester break. No idea why the policy was so lenient, except that it was a very upper middle class school full of high achievers who vastly outnumbered slackers like myself. Story 13. When I was in grade 7, our last class of the day, students would always bring in snacks. Our lunch shift was way too early in the day, so by the end of the school day we'd all be feeling hungry, and we were all told by our teacher that if we didn't have enough to share, we couldn't eat in the classroom. One day, Almost all of us brought in enough food to share, even with the students that didn't bring anything in. We even synchronized the times that we pulled all our food out. Our teacher was clueless. She had no idea what to tell us. There wasn't any school-wide no food in classrooms rule, so she couldn't run to the principal. Finally, she gave in to our malicious compliance and allowed us to share food for the rest of the period. Story 14. We had a French teacher who was really bad, and most people barely tolerated it. It happened a few times that whoever arrived first would stand outside her door, as if waiting for her to show up and unlock it, and the rest of the class would just queue up behind them, pretending to believe them. Meanwhile, the teacher would just be sitting inside wondering where her class was. Story 15. Last year, our school imposed a ban on backpacks and bags in general, since they were apparently a safety hazard. 2 days later, some guy in my year group came in carrying his books and pencil case in a microwave. Dude made national news. Story 16. One of my classmates got sent to the office for wearing gang colors because he has a red Marine Corps bandana tied to his backpack. The rest of the year, he wore a pinstripe suit with vest and carried a fedora. Story 17. My daughters both went to a Catholic high school. My younger one had a bit of a wild streak. The girls were required to wear a skirt every day to school. My daughter did not care for this rule and wore her skirt around her head one day, since the dress code required the students to wear a skirt, just not wear. I was told that she was wearing spandex underneath. That's how my daughter got a new rule in her high school dress code. Story 18. My high school was always issuing new dress code rules for the girls. Miniskirts had to be longer than your arm, no tube tops, etc. One day, all the boys dressed in drag, breaking all the rules. No violation because the dress code specified only girls. Story 19. Elementary school had a ban on extreme hair colors. My brother shows up with fire truck red hair. Principal stops us both as we're entering the school, and she's going off on my brother. She's berating him, saying, "Who do you know that has red hair like that without skipping a beat? Ronald McDonald." The principal just grabbed him and dragged him into the office. My 4th grade brain wasn't shocked that he had just one up, too grown up like that. She called my dad, and he promptly didn't give a, and months later, bro went from red to green to purple. Story 20. This was prior to smartphones circa 2002. One of my classmates was a regular class clown. He would buy brownies in the cafeteria and then roll them up in his hands, so they looked like a convincing piece of poo. He would then do all sorts of antics with this poo. Put it on seats, throw it at people, what have you. Obviously, the school staff caught on and he got in trouble. This guy didn't go quietly, though. He was required to sit alone at lunch for the entire school year. There were months left before summer. The one teacher who may ensure his punishment was severe made regular rounds of the lunchroom to maintain order. She would pass his lone seat during her rounds. One day he made another very convincing pastry-sourced poo and had it ready for her when she passed. The entire lunchroom was watching out of the corner of their eyes while maintaining an alibi conversation with the people close to them. When she passed, he stood up and snuck behind her and slipped the pastry poo in her purse that she was carrying on her shoulder, and he quickly ran back to his seat. The lunchroom burst into laughter and the teacher had no idea why, until later. Of course, the dude was an artist at rebellion. Story 21. In 3rd grade, early 90s, my brother did not want to participate in some sort of multiple class activity. He just hung around the edges until a teacher approached him and told him, "Now, dear, you can't be here without participating." Brother took what she said to heart and waited for a chance to slip away. He made it about 3 miles before a family friend noticed him and drove him the rest of the way home. I remember Mom being upset at him, but even more angry at the school for taking 4 hours to notice. He was gone when they took a head count. After lunch. Story 22. At vending machines outside the buildings, but due to some asshat vandalizing them, this understandably pissed the school board off. The machines were put off limits but could not be powered down due to some kind of contractual obligation of constant availability. In an effort to combat that, faculty were posted at the machines during class changes to prevent purchases, but thankfully no one was posted at the machines during class time. Mind you, This is the 97 to 99 era. We weren't happy as that was our sole source of caffeine on campus. We decided to check with that and made purchases during class. Me being the live tiny guy I was conscripted to be the buyer while the teacher was either out of the room or indisposed. Or, let's be honest, intentionally distracted. I would collect cash and requests 4 at a time and hop out the emergency escape window that they had opted to not have an alarm on and walk 20 feet to the soda machine and make my purchase. This went on for some time until the drink companies lambasted the school board for not restocking their dwindling supplies. Allegedly, as per contract, they put 2 and 2 together and realized that the purchases were still being made. Apparently, I was not the only gopher and lifted the ban on my last year. Story 23. It wasn't a big defiant act or anything, but I loved it and it always stuck with me. One day in high school, we had a particularly hard snow. We were certain school would be canceled, but womp, womp. No dice. No one was allowed to leave the building during lunch, but a bunch of kids said it that day and ran outside to have a big old snowball fight. We all watched as they had an awesome time and a couple randos joined in. I was too chicken. They all got detention, but I know it was worth it. It was so simple and harmless, and I remember it almost 15 years later. Story 24. So I went to school in South Texas, an area in which it almost never snows. For me, this doesn't mean anything, but I have lived in most of the North for my life, so I know what it's like to play in snow. However, somehow it ended up snowing overnight. And by snowing, I mean like what snow looked like in the North, deep and not just thin and watery. These were immensely heavy flakes. We were all sure that they would cancel school because Texas does not have salt machines or snow plows, and the roads were super slick. A lot of parents didn't want their kids to go to school because they didn't feel comfortable with a bunch of new high school drivers on ice. Yet, alas, they, of course, did not cancel school. A little rain knocks out our whole district, but a foot of snow and nothing. My mother made us take the bus because, although she felt comfortable driving in snow, being from Illinois, Texas drivers are more aggressive and the roads weren't properly cleared. I took the bus and it was like being on a safari tour. Kids were taking pictures of the icicles on trees and all wide-eyed. It was funny. Once we got to school, though, the campus looked like a war zone. No one would go inside and had instead resorted to snowball fights on the entire campus and parking lots. Once the bell rang, of course, no one went inside. I watched from the window as the vice principal went to the front of the school and commanded the kids inside. Of course, getting nailed in his bald-ass head by snowballs. He finally managed to round up the road, kids, and we all went about the first period. I had a relaxed teacher who knew no one would pay attention, since half the class was missing anyway. She let us act out the Civil War with snowballs and took us outside. While we were playing outside, we all paused as we heard the fire alarm go off. The school came pouring out for the next 2 periods. Dude that pulled the fire alarm is a legend and lives on at our school till this day. He did, in fact, get arrested along with another kid that thought it'd be smart to throw ice at a cop. That was the one time I saw the high school completely not have a handle on anyone.